Here's a quick summary of how to use these easels. So there are a lot of movable parts on the easel, so whenever you see a wing nut, that means you can adjust something. So you can fix the angle of the easel, so you can angle it down more or more upright, but you can also adjust the height. So right there, I'm showing you the height. I'm taking my fingers and I'm twisting and loosening that wing nut so that I can raise the easel up. Now you do have to tighten that wing nut back down, otherwise it will slam down just like a guillotine. So be careful about the adjustments. Right there I'm adjusting the angle. You want the angle to be not quite vertical, just a little bit angled beyond the vertical line there. All right, you're going to be taking your cardboard. So this is where your portfolio comes in handy because you're going to be using that as a board. And you're going to be taking that paper that we're using and you're going to be taping down the paper to the board. Now I like to work at eye level and I recommend that you try doing that too. And I really am encouraging you, if you can, both those of you who are in person and distance, to try doing this standing up. So you're not looking down at a sheet of paper, you're looking up and directly at eye level-ish to the best of your ability and painting that way. So you do want to tape it onto your board, and I like to tape it on all four sides to avoid any kind of warping because I don't want the paper to buckle or to bow in any way. So I am using a reference for this, but I'm also going to be using a tape roll to get a perfect circle first. You can freehand it, and that's probably what I would do if I weren't doing a demonstration for you guys. But it can also help as a guideline to have a perfect circle, so I will give you that option of taking the tape roll and tracing the outer diameter of that circle. And then I'm going to adjust it because I don't want it to be a perfect circle unless you're trying to replicate a ball, and a ball would be perfect. But I'm looking to draw and paint an apple, and apples are not perfectly 100% round. And I want a couple little funky angles. So I'm using my pencil here first, and I honestly start most of my paintings off with some kind of pencil outline or an outline done with watered down paint. But I recommend that you start with a pencil outline. And your options are to do a fruit or another round object that you can think of. I'm sure there's some vegetables that are round. Or you can do a perfectly round sphere, like a ball. Like if you look at a pool ball, that would be a good one to do. But again, about that size of a masking tape roll, so pretty big. Your sphere should be no smaller than 3.5 inches if you measure it across. So at least that size, because you don't want it to appear teeny tiny in this huge area of background. I also want to point out that you want to leave room for the cast shadow. The cast shadow is really important there. And I intentionally pushed my apple to the right side so there would be a space for the cast shadow. And I think I've also mentioned this before, but you want to make sure that your object of interest isn't dead center. You want to move it, shift it either to the right or to the left. In this case, it made sense to push it to the right, again, to make room for that cast shadow. Remember, the cast shadow is the shadow that's sitting on the ground. With the cast shadow, it's really important that you make it look like an oval, so like this sphere, but stretched out. How long the cast shadow is dependent on the light and where the light is at. So if the light is really low and close to the object, your shadow is going to be even more stretched. If it is from above, that shadow might be a lot smaller. So think oval shape for a cast shadow. And then I did put a line back there for horizon line, but I'm not sure if I'm going to use it. So you don't necessarily have to put that line in. So here I'm outlining the shadow areas. So think back to when we were studying the sphere with just drawing materials. Now we're going to be doing the same thing, but with paint. So that's the form shadow I'm drawing. And I'm looking at my reference picture and asking myself, okay, where is the shadow area on here? So I need to get in that form shadow. I'm also outlining right there the highlight. There's a little highlight on that apple. So you do need to have a form shadow, a cast shadow, and you just want to look at any place where there is a shift in value. And I'm not talking about color yet because we're not getting to that. We're just talking about value. Okay, so now we can go into the painting part of it. Most painters work from dark to light, and that's what we're going to practice at first here. We're going to do that same policy of working from our darkest value and then working our way to the lighter ranges. We'll save the highlights really for last. So I'm getting in the cast shadow there, and you do need to look at your reference and look at the cast shadow. There are some rules though that you can keep in mind. So one of the rules is that as that cast shadow goes out towards the edge, it should get a little bit paler the farther it moves away from the object. When you're applying the cast shadow, direction of your brush and the length of your brush strokes are important. You don't want to go in big, long strokes. You're doing a range of short strokes. So I'm kind of like flicking my brush there. And just wanted to remind you, when you're holding that brush, it's very important that you're holding it towards the back of the brush. Your fingers should be nowhere near the metal part, which is called the ferrule. It should be back towards the end of the handle. You want to kind of hold it like a wand. So up until this point, I've been using, I think, a mixture of black, but with color. We talked also about that you want to always flavor black with another color. Otherwise, it looks really flat. And we're not going for flat, we're going for a little bit of dimension and volume. So I mixed some blues and greens into that black so it is not as flat. And of course, I'm going to be working this up with more layers later on. Here's where it starts to kind of pale out, and it's right along the rim of the cast shadow. So it's just going to become like, have this kind of like halo effect around the rim where it just gets paler and paler farther it goes out. So same deal with the apple itself. We're starting with the darkest area of the apple or whatever object you're doing. And again, you don't have to do the same color palette I'm using. You can use a different color palette, or you can try and replicate what you're seeing in the photograph. And you want to go with the darks. So here we're working on what's called the form shadow. You should remember that term, form shadow. It means the shadow that's actually on your object. The form shadow, you can see it's not just one value. There's actually multiple values and different colors, right? So now we can actually talk about color. Here I'm not using any black. In fact, I switched to a different brush, and I'm using the combination of blue and red and maybe a tiny bit of yellow and the warmer colors down low. There's a little bit of reflected light there. So reflected light happens when the tabletop, whatever color the tabletop is, which is going to be a paler color, bounces onto the shadow side of the shape. So the light bounces from the tabletop to the form shadow. And you can see it when you look at your reference, that there is usually some reflected light, which is light that's bounced off from the surface onto the object. And I am just addressing areas that are dark. I did switch to a skinnier brush there to get the stem in. So that stem is kind of a darker value. And there was a little shadow there. And now again, I've switched my brush so I can start getting into the midtones. So midtones are those mid-level values where if I were to photograph this in black and white, it would register as a medium gray. So not black, not charcoal gray, but more of like a medium gray. Even though we're talking about red, it does have a value too. So up until this point, I haven't added any white yet. I'm waiting to add the whites. And I'm just looking at the photograph to tell me the colors and the values. I'm looking at that, and my eye is bouncing from photograph to the object at hand. And by the way, I usually clip my photograph that I'm using to my board. So we have these little bulldog clips that I use, and I clip it right onto the board right next to where I'm painting. The closer the photograph is to your drawing, I think the more helpful it is, because you can retain the image in your mind. At least that's what works for me. If you're online, you can print the photograph or you can have it up on a screen, but you do need to have it near you so you can keep referring back to the image, and then your eye should be bouncing back and forth. So here is where I'm starting to add a little bit of white. So that red is starting to shift to a pink, and I'm adding a little bit of yellow in, so it's creating a red-orange or a coral color because of the whites. And right now, I am not overly concerned with perfect transitions. I'm just focused on getting down the basic info. If I can get a perfect transition, I'll take it, but I will continue to work on it. Remember, because the form shadow to the mid-tone does need to be a soft change, but since it's the first layer, it doesn't have to be perfect. Now, in this particular apple, there was like a little spot of kind of yellow gold, and that's what you're seeing there on the right-hand side is yellow gold plus maybe a tiny bit of yellow green in there. So you can see I've left the highlights open for now. I'm going to be going in there as the last part of the lesson today and filling those in. So the temperature of the color is important. You have to ask yourself, is this warm? Is it leaning cool? And you also have to try and figure out the value. How does this relate to the other colors in terms of value? And just want to remind you, we're still using those same basic colors that the primary colors, red, yellow, blue, plus whites and black. So white and black are tints and shades. Tints for the white, shade for the black. So that's how I'm making all these colors by those, using those primary colors. And remember, for the highlight, you want to let it get progressively lighter as you go towards the center. This is where I'm going to stop today, and then we will work on the background next class.